guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing a book review of The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. I don't actually have a physical copy of this book. I borrowed it from my friend Bella. You can check out her Instagram. I'm going to link that down below. She's like a groupie. She watches a lot of my videos, so yeah. Thank you, Bella, for this one because it was such a good book. You may also know it by, I'm going to need your help to pronounce her name, but there's a movie of The Lovely Bones and the main character in it is her. I always say her name wrong. I didn't even want to try. So let's just get right into it. So a quick plot of this book is that it takes place in 1973, which if you know me, I don't usually like period things. I don't really like anything that's... This takes place in 1973, which if you know me, I don't really like anything that's older than modern day. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people. But you don't really notice that in this book. It's about a young girl named Susie Salmon, and she gets murdered, and she's basically just trying to adjust to heaven. She's watching down on her family to see how they are coping with her being gone and how her killer's doing as well, and like how he's getting away with it and like if the police are getting close to him kind of thing. The main conflict in this book is a little bit hard to tell. The book is a lot less thriller than I normally read, but it definitely has some scary parts. The conflict is defined as being like the main obstacle in a book, but obviously she's dead. So like that's a pretty large obstacle because she's up in heaven and like she wants to be able to tell them like, hey, this guy was the killer. I would consider the main conflict to be between her and her family members as they attempt to move on, because she's trying to move on. She's like kind of in heaven, but not 100%. And then her family as they're trying to grieve without her being there. The genre category would again be a mystery, fiction. If it was a TV show, you would say drama. I'd say this book is like definitely a drama. But I've noticed with books that that's not really a category. Some of the characters are Susie, which is obviously the main character. She's the one who gets murdered. She's the main narrator as well, but this book is narrated in a very interesting way, as I will talk about. Then there's George Harvey, which is Susie's killer. He's middle-aged, older. He's actually one of their neighbors. I don't think he's like their next door neighbor, but he's right there. And none of that is a spoiler, I'm gonna be honest. It was in like page 10. He's also being watched by Susie above as he's trying to cover his tracks. And that's something that I found really disturbing about this book, is it'll say like, I sat on his floor in a bag as he took the shower to watch the blood off, but like I sat in a bag is actually like Susie's body sat in a bag, but she's like watching it from heaven. Like there's stuff like that that are quite disturbing, but I would say the majority of the book is more like a drama and a family story. Then we have Lindsay, which is Susie's younger sister. They're quite close in age from what I can tell. She's now considered the oldest and she's also the only girl, and she's kind of trying to find a way for people to see her as a separate person than her sister, because now when they look at her, they're very similar looking, so they see Susie and they also see like, oh, that's the sister of the dead girl kind of thing. Then there's Buckley. He's the youngest. He's Susie's brother. He was so cute, and a lot of like the heart-wrenching moments in this book I found revolved around him, because he keeps asking where his sister is, but they don't know how to explain to him what death is and that she's gone. He's also kind of learning like facial cues, and like they talk about that, like he's learning how to tell if someone's lying to him. One of the things, I don't really think this is a spoiler, but like earlier on in the book when they were trying to distract him, they said like, come on, let's go get some ice cream or something like that, and he immediately forgot and was like, oh yay, ice cream. And then as the book's going on, it's somebody says like, oh come on, don't worry, you can like sleep in my room tonight, is like what his sister says when something scary or sad is happening. And then it said like he's beginning to realize that when somebody gives him something positive, it's usually because he's getting bad news later, like stuff like that he's kind of growing up and he's realizing what the world is like. So that was upsetting to read. He was one of my favorite characters because he showed really well how trauma can affect a young child and how the parents tried to cope with it, that kind of thing. Then there's Jack, which is Susie's dad, and he hears about what happened with her first, and he kind of works directly with the cops, but he ends up kind of being more of a hindrance, so he's trying to go in between being helpful and wanting her killer to be found, but then also he gets in their way a lot. He's also struggling to keep a brave face for his family. He wants to kind of be like, you know, the head of the household basic thing, and then it talks about him going off on his own and getting quite upset. And then there's Abigail, which is Susie's mom. At first, she's more like the distraught mother, and then her character drastically changes. I was often unsure how to feel about her, but I definitely had empathy for her by the end. There's other people like friends and the cops and the grandmother that are larger characters, but I'm not gonna bother going into detail about them. Something that I loved about this book was the narration style, like I mentioned that I would talk about. It was often my father growing up, and it was as though it was from the father's perspective then. Like it was pretty much in everyone's perspectives, but it was described as like my father, my brother, like that kind of thing, as though it's Susie looking down, but she's also almost in their minds and like seeing how they're thinking and how they're acting. It made the story a lot more interesting to read. It didn't seem like a novel as much as it was like a retelling, because it was like if somebody says to you, oh yeah, this is what I was feeling at the time, then it's like, oh yeah, my father felt this at that time. It was kind of like that. Something that I didn't like is it's not as much mystery as I normally read and that I would have preferred. The second highest category on Goodreads is mystery, but it's more of a contemporary novel is also what it's listed at, which I would agree with. Also, one of the final scenes I found very strange, which if you watch other people's reviews, they also say the same thing. And it's different, extraordinarily different in the movie from in the book. But if you've read it, and probably if you've watched the movie, you'll know what I mean, but I'll get into that later. I was gonna pick it up for the rating, but I don't have it. I did rate it 5 out of 5 easily. It was one of the best books I've read in a long time. It very genuinely, like no joke, made me laugh out loud at times, and then I'd have to explain to the person that I was with what was happening because that's just my personality. I'm so annoying to read with. It also hurt my heart in ways that books haven't in a long time, like I explained with Buckley. I will explain with her parents. Her mom specifically, there was a lot of things that made me look at families in a different way. I again found it hard to think of a similar book, so I decided to skip the middleman and just go to Goodreads. And ones that I found were similar were listed as Gone Girl, The Girl on the Train, etc. But I personally disagree with those just because this was much less mystery and more fiction. And I actually haven't read either of those books, even though they are on my TBR, but I just disagree with that ranking. That's all I have to say for my non-spoiler section. So if you want to watch this movie and then come back and watch this, or you are planning on reading this book, which I do highly recommend it. There's not really a whole lot of spoilers that can be said, given that you already know who her killer is. I'm gonna get into the spoiler section now, and if you want to click off, I totally understand, because I don't want to spoil this for anyone that is planning on reading it.
Spoilers.
Oh, bless. Thank you. Bless. Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned, the book pretty much started off immediately with Susie getting murdered, which I found set a really creepy tone for it, and I was really excited to read it then because I enjoy creepy things, but I found that was a little bit misleading because the rest of the book, it was a darker novel, but it wasn't like creepy like that at all. And I will say that's probably one of the darkest things that happened in it, or the darkest things that were described, or similar to like, you know, my body was sitting on the floor, like that kind of thing. So a couple of things that happened were the dad immediately suspects George Harvey, the neighbor. He didn't at first, but then he went over and spent some time with George when everything was happening, when they were like looking for her daughter's body, because that's another thing, is they never actually find her body, but it's like they find a bunch of her blood and they find like part of her elbow and like that kind of thing that you pretty much know that she's dead. They never find her body like for the whole thing, but I mean, as we know, she is dead. Problem is that he's so convinced that it's Mr. Harvey that he often gets in the way of the police, and that's where he becomes more of a hindrance, because he tries to take matters into his own hands when they feel like they haven't done enough because the police have cleared him, and he thinks like, no, he did. It is actually him, but obviously the police are looking at him as a distraught father. But it's unfortunate to read because you do actually know that he's right. The largest thing that made me look at families in a different way is the mom, Abigail, withdrew so much to the point that she actually ends up leaving her family at one point, like for years. So when they talk about it from her perspective, you find out that when she was younger, she enjoyed going off and being in different places and working at like little coffee shops, and she enjoyed traveling, and she was very much like an independent person. And now she's like a suburban mom with a family, and she misses that old version of herself. And it's not that she regrets having her kids, but she does miss the person that she was before. And I thought that was so upsetting to read, just because I've heard of people like that, like anonymous people on the internet that'll be talking about, it's not that they don't love their kids, but they do kind of wish that they never had them, and that's kind of what this reminded me of. And I found that that was hard to read and hard to like be in her shoes and see that. And then also hard to, because I don't have any kids, it's hard to like be a daughter and think like, okay, did my parents ever feel that way? Did they ever miss like the people that they were before they were just considered like in the mom role or in the dad role? Did they ever miss like just being able to be a person? Because that was a big part of her story. She ends up actually cheating on her husband with the cop, like the main detective that's working on this, again, because she wants to feel something. She doesn't want to be considered the mom and in this role. And like I mentioned, she does leave her family. She goes to be at a winery because I don't remember where it is, like California maybe. It just really was heart-wrenching to read about. I was unsure how to feel about her for a long time because obviously Susie's dad is holding up that now that he's lost his daughter, and then his wife basically leaves him and didn't say anything. Like he didn't know that they were being cheated on. Like his wife literally like leaves in the middle of the night and he can't get in contact with her, like that kind of thing. So now all of a sudden he's a single dad and he's just lost his daughter. Like it was just very hard. And I found that the mother was very selfish to do that, but that's the thing, is that that's the point, is she wanted to be selfish. She wanted to be able to be a person again and to make her own choices. So I was very torn on how to feel about it. It also hinted at it through many parts in the book that she's always felt this way, so it kind of makes it obvious that losing Susie really like put her over the edge, and that's when she made the final decision to actually leave. Mr. Harvey does end up getting looked at and kind of caught. He evades the police for as long as he can, and then once he's not suspected at all, he takes his stuff and leaves, and then they realize like, oh crap, he actually did do it, and when they go back, he's like gone, like he's dropped off the face of the earth. I just realized that's really ironic because my next note is that at the end it talks about he's just like living his life in little cabins and he's killed many people. Like he actually is like a serial killer, and it lists all the people that he's killed and like what, not like what he did to them, but like if he lured them in or if they were younger, older, whatever, that kind of thing. And it explains a little bit about his backstory and kind of like what happened to him when he was younger that would impact that, which I'd taken some psychology courses and criminology and learned about like the things that make a serial murderer, and so they did kind of include some of that into this book. Why it's funny that I said dropping off the face of the earth is that the end of this book is he really hasn't learned his lesson, and he finds another woman and he's kind of trying to like get her to trust him so that he can kidnap her and then eventually murder her. And they're out by this overhang and the girl walks away and I think something falls on his snow, maybe falls on his head. Anyways, he literally falls off the cliff and dies. So they never catch him. But that's, I said fall, he was basically just fell off the face of the earth, but he did. He actually fell off a cliff and died, and that was how like the book ended, is he was never really caught, but you do know he won't ever hurt anybody again. Eventually, as they get older, it's talking about how Lindsay's now 21, where she'd been 13 when it started, so it does do a time jump. Their dad has a heart attack. Susie's mom's mom has been staying with them, which is a little bit awkward given that, you know, her daughter left and that's the reason that they need help. And she calls her daughter and says, like, they're still considered married. She says, you know, Jax had a heart attack. So then she gets on a flight and she goes home and she meets her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend and her son at the airport. And that's like, her son basically has no memories of this woman because he was so young when she left. It never really goes into what happens in the future, but it does seem like she's planning on sticking around. When she's in the hospital, she says like she's just basically waiting for him to wake up and then she's gonna say goodbye. But then they end up like going home and it just seems like it might end up that she does actually stay. But I like that they left it open-ended, because as much as you would, you know, want her to stay for the family to be whole again, because it does talk about her and her husband basically falling in love all over again in the hospital. But you also saw from her perspective how much she loved being able to be independent and not being listed as a mom necessarily. So you would like to have it both ways, so I like that it was an open-ended ending. By far, my least favorite part of this book, that everybody has also mentioned being their least favorite part of the book, because like, what? You really have to have an open mind to read this book, just because it's talking about Susie being in heaven and you need to I believe in ghosts, so I'm fine with that. But I did hear about people kind of having to stretch their imagination. But then I also heard people saying that this part, it was too far for them. And honestly, even me being an avid ghost believer. I agree that this was too far. Throughout the book, her crush from when she was 14, his name is Ray, and a girl that she was somewhat friends with named Ruth. Ruth grew up basically to be like a medium. She can see ghosts, and I think part of it was Susie was talking about when she left her body, she basically like almost bumped into Ruth, and now like Ruth dreamed about Susie for a really long time and almost had this fascination with her and her death and the afterlife, and becomes really good friends with Ray. Ray really doesn't have any other friends. So once they're adults, they stay friends even though they've been going to different schools. At the end of the book, Susie ends up possessing Ruth, and she makes it seem like she wasn't expecting it, but it's like Ruth goes up to heaven almost because she wants to see what it's like. Her spirit goes to heaven and Susie's spirit comes down to earth and possesses Ruth's body. I explained it as kind of like a paranormal Freaky Friday, because throughout the book, Susie was saying about how everybody in heaven really likes Ruth because they like that she actually cares what happens to them. Susie ends up convincing Ray that it is actually her now in Ruth's body, and has sex with Ray in Ruth's body. And I have a lot of issues with that because, as do other people, because she's still like a 14-year-old girl spirit thing, even though she's like watched everybody else grow up. Ray is apparently still hung up on the girl that he kissed once when he was 14. And I feel like that very much violates Ruth's body. I don't know, there was just a lot of it that made me really uncomfortable, and I feel like I understand that it was supposed to be kind of closure for Susie, but I just found that very hard to read, and yeah. I understand where the author was attempting to go, but it felt very out of place compared to the rest of the book. Slightly uncomfortable as well. But back to the good stuff. The ending made me cry, as I mentioned, specifically because it was about Susie letting go, because all of her family goes back and they're talking, and I don't remember what they talk about, but it's a very normal conversation, and then it's basically, and then Susie blipped out, and it's basically Susie moving on, and it's talking about, you know, there's times in life you need to let go, and I still think about my family, and my family still thinks about me, but it was saying how it was hard because they didn't really know that she'd been watching over them this whole time, meaning that they also didn't really miss her when she stopped doing that, and that made me really sad. I thought that that was kind of depressing. The ending was beautifully written, the whole book was beautifully written, but specifically the ending I thought was really touching and really spoke more about the philosophical part of this whole book, about moving on and going to heaven and that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's basically my thoughts on this book. Final thoughts is that this book will always have a special place in my heart. I was going to watch the movie before doing this review and do them both in one, and I'm just realizing I forgot to do that now. So I'm gonna do another video soon where I'll like compare them. I'll make it 2 different videos, I guess. But yeah, this book is a 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved it, and I recommend reading it. Even after hearing everything that happens, there's still, I didn't include many of the little details, and it's still such a touching story that I feel like everybody should read, because it dives into the dark parts of family, but also how to grieve properly. And I think that that's everything. Let me know down below if you've watched the movie, if you've read the book, or what your thoughts are, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys. They're